Decatur Dispatch, this is Kelly. What's going on?
Went to try to secure a vehicle, and debtor came out of the house and pulled a gun on me.
Who's the debtor that pulled the gun?
Vehicle's name is under Stephen Perkins.
Decatur Police Officers enter Stephen Perkins' neighborhood walking toward his house. Eventually, the video shows the small group stop next to Perkins' home. It appears that as the tow truck driver hitches Perkins' pickup truck, Perkins walks outside.
Hey, what's up there?
Marquette says he and his officers took various positions around Perkins' home, and when the driver began repossession of the vehicle, Perkins came out of the home with his arm extended and a gun in plain view. Marquette says he saw Perkins, quote, advance toward the tow truck driver and point the gun at the driver. Marquette says he reacted to what he saw as a threat by yelling and identifying himself as police, commanding Perkins to drop his weapon.
Police originally said the officer told Perkins to drop the weapon and that Perkins refused to do so. Now, Chief Pinion says that's not what happened.
These Decatur police officers showed up to Stephen's house looking for a fight. And that is not the only issue here, because these police officers had no business going to Stephen's house to begin with, legally speaking. As a matter of fact, a judge would later call one of those officers a trespasser on Stephen's property, the only officer to fire 18 shots in Stephen's direction. Oh, but there's way more to this story. So, to better understand this case, let's go back to the beginning. 39-year-old father and husband Stephen Perkins was home at his residence in Decatur, Alabama in the early morning hours of September 29th, 2023. And when I say early, we're talking around 12:30, 1 a.m. Now, tow truck driver Caleb Combs, who works for Allstar Recovery in Decatur, states he received a repossession order for Stephen Perkins' truck from the lien holder on the truck, which was Pentagon Federal Credit Union, which I'm assuming is the company that Stephen got his loan through to purchase the truck. Now, here is where our first issue comes in with this case, because Stephen's family later stated they were never late on payments and that the loan company got it wrong.
His attorneys and family members just want to know what happened that September 29th night.
They ambushed my brother and then took his truck, at least allowed his truck to leave. It was an active crime scene. I don't get it.
Now, after the shooting, Steve Perkins' family says that Perkins was not behind on his payments. There was really no reason for that repo driver to even be at the house. They now feel vindicated now that they have this truck back in custody.
However, I've also read that there have been documents entered into evidence during discovery that show that Stephen was in fact several months late on his loan. So we'll have to see what happens there. But back to the story. So after receiving that order for repossession, tow truck driver Caleb Combs drives over to 3931 Ryan Drive, which is Stephen's residence. And he does this late at night for obvious reasons. My guess is he's trying to avoid confrontation, so he does it in the middle of the night, hoping the people that own these vehicles are asleep. However, to his surprise, as Caleb Combs pulls up to 3931 Ryan Drive, he is met by Stephen Perkins outside, who is allegedly holding a firearm. And Stephen told that tow truck driver that he in fact was not repossessing his truck that evening. Now, the tow truck driver, seeing that Stephen was armed, obviously didn't think it was worth a fight. So he left Stephen's home without towing his truck. But that is not where this story ends. Tow truck driver Caleb Combs then drives back to his shop to lick his wounds and decides to call 911. Here is that 911 call.
Decatur Dispatch, this is Kelly.
Hey, Kelly, this is Caleb with Allstar Recovery.
Hey.
I was wondering if you could get an officer out here to our lot.
What's the address?
3920 Full Valley Road.
Okay, what was your name again?
Caleb.
And what's your phone number there?
My personal is 256.
Okay, what's going on?
Went to try to secure a vehicle, and debtor came out of the house and pulled a gun on me.
Where did that happen?
3931 Ryan Drive.
Okay, did they fire off a shot or anything?
No, it just I called Jack earlier, and he said that pushes the borders of evil and criminal.
Who's the debtor that pulled the gun?
The vehicle's name is under Stephen Perkins, but I don't know who the gentleman was that come out on me.
Okay. Do you know what he was?
I'm assuming it's him.
Okay. Did you get a look at him? What he looked like?
Yeah, he's bald, like a milk chocolate color, black man.
Okay. Did you see what he was wearing?
He come out in basketball shorts and like a white T-shirt.
Did you see what kind of gun it was?
I did not. It was dark.
Okay. Was it a handgun or a long gun?
Yeah.
It's a handgun.
Handgun.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll get somebody down to y'all shop on Pool Valley to meet with you.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
ma'am.
Thanks.
So then the call gets dispatched out to the Decatur Police Officers.
Bravo 59 clear.
10-4. I have a meat complaint I'm holding for you.
10-4, go ahead.
It's going to be 3920 Pool Valley Road Southwest. Callers requesting to meet at Allstar Recovery reference. He was trying to get a vehicle on Ryan Drive, and the male stepped out and pulled a gun on him. And you can see your notes are further. 3920 Pool Valley Road Southwest.
Now, what happens next is based on research that I've done and court documents I've read in the civil lawsuit. So based on the court documents, it states that officers Marquette, Williams, Mockmed, and Summers, along with tow truck driver Caleb Combs and another man named Richie Brady, entered into an agreement after making a plan of action on what to do next. The officers and the tow truck drivers decided they were going to return to Stephen's home, driving back to 3931 Ryan Drive just before 2 a.m. But here's the thing. When the Decatur police officers got to Stephen's house, they didn't go to the front door. No, because that wasn't the plan.
Decatur police officers enter Stephen Perkins' neighborhood walking toward his house. We've sped up the walking for time purposes. It takes them about 90 seconds to reach the side of Perkins' home. Zooming out, we can see the full layout of the neighborhood. Eventually, the video shows the small group stop next to Perkins' home. A couple of the individuals walked down the next-door neighbor's driveway, one crossing the street, the other returning to the side of Perkins' house.
Instead, when those officers got to Stephen Perkins' subdivision, they decided to pull out some SEAL Team 6 bullshit. Once those officers got into Stephen's neighborhood, for 12 minutes, they walked around and took tactical positions around Stephen's home and also parked their patrol cars down the street with the lights off so nobody would detect they were there. Now, one of those officers, Marquette, positioned himself right on the side of the garage up by the house. The tow truck driver would again go to repossess Stephen's truck from the driveway. And apparently, Stephen was still awake because when he looked out his window, this is what he saw. However, Stephen did not see any of the Decatur police officers. So then again, Stephen would come outside in an attempt to stop the tow truck driver from repossessing his truck. And again, Stephen would come outside with a firearm in hand that had a flashlight connected to the bottom of it. Now what happens next takes only 7 seconds. As Stephen goes to approach that tow truck driver in the driveway, Officer Marquette comes from around the side of the garage. Now you can hear Stephen tell the tow truck driver to put his truck down, just before Officer Marquette yells at Stephen to get on the ground.
$5.95 you got one coming to the door.
And before he was ever given a chance to comply, Officer Marquette would then fire 18 shots in Stephen's direction. And he was the only officer on scene that opened fire. Now Stephen would be hit by 7 of those shots and immediately fell to the ground, obviously in really bad shape from the get-go. In the body cam footage, you can then see the other Decatur police officers emerge from their hidden positions to place Stephen under arrest while he's bleeding out on the ground. Now, it appears from the body cam footage, those officers did attempt to provide first aid to Stephen while at the same time calling for an ambulance. Once the paramedics arrived, Stephen was transported to the hospital in critical condition, where he would ultimately lose his life. Now, if I was the paramedic showing up on scene to this call, here is what I would do. Always first thing, scene safety. If there's still an active shooter, you do not approach the patient or enter the crime scene. But let's assume the scene is now safe. First things first, as I approach the patient, I'm going to be thinking about and assessing a couple things at the same time. While I'm getting the story from the officers and getting the initial impression from what I see, I'm going to take into account the number of people I have on scene medically to help me. I am also going to consider the distance I am from the hospital. I'm also going to be assessing the level of acuity I think the patient is right off the bat based on the mechanism of injury or nature of illness. And I'm going to put all those things together and decide what I think is appropriate to do on scene or whether or not it's time to immediately pack up the patient and get going. Which, after performing a rapid trauma assessment and seeing that Stephen is shot 7 times, we're going to lean towards that second one and decide it's time to go to the hospital right now. And you should be able to make this decision right away in the first 30 seconds to a minute from approaching the patient. A seasoned paramedic can usually tell right off the bat how bad off a patient is in about 60 seconds, based on how they're presenting and a couple other factors. Most of the interventions that I'm going to do to Stephen are going to be done en route to the hospital as my partner drives. Stephen was shot 7 times. Multiple times in the torso area. As we all know, there are a lot of very vital organs in that area of the body. And the only thing that's going to save Stephen's life is surgical intervention. He needs to be at the hospital right now. But that doesn't mean things can't be done while we're loading him up on the stretcher and getting him over to the hospital. While loading Stephen up, I'm going to immediately make sure he has an open airway while also getting him on oxygen. Anybody with severe bleeding, this should be an automatic. Blood loss equals oxygen loss. Also, while loading Stephen up, I'm going to assess his pulse and get a baseline set of vital signs to see where we're starting from. And these are good numbers to trend while en route to the hospital to see if your patient is declining. Now, en route to the hospital, if it's only me in the back and I have to perform CPR, that's really about the only thing that I'm going to be able to focus on during the transport. And one thing we're going to make sure to do during that transport is having that patient on the cardiac monitor, so I can also assess if there are any needs for pacing, defibrillation, or cardioversion. Now, if I have time and have the ability to, I'm going to also start an IV. Preferably 2. Any major trauma with bleeding, it's recommended you start 2 large bore IVs and get some fluid running to help support that patient's blood pressure and also provide more of a circulating volume in that person's body. Now, lastly, en route to the hospital, you're going to want to call the hospital to let them know that you are bringing in a person who's been shot. Most of the time, the hospital provides a heightened security in the emergency room when a person comes in who's been shot by a firearm. And this is for a number of reasons. One of the examples I could give is hospitals in Detroit. At least years ago, when I used to work in that area, let's say a gang member was shot and taken to one of the local Detroit hospitals. Now, what would happen is that rival gang member who shot that person would have people waiting at the hospital for the ambulance to arrive. So when that ambulance showed up with the person that they just shot, those gang members could finish the job. Now, obviously, this isn't safe for anybody, the EMS crew or the gang member who's just been shot. So the hospitals down there would have armed officers waiting for that ambulance to arrive when you called in your report. Now, I want to first start out with how the law applies to this case, at least as I've read it. I did not know this, but apparently in the state of Alabama, if you are a repossession company and you would like the police to come with you or get involved in that repossession, they need to have a court order. Without a court order in the state of Alabama, you cannot involve the police if you're a tow truck company or somebody that does repossessions looking for help from the police without that court order. So now I know some of you are then going to say, but Stephen pulled a firearm on that tow truck driver. He had every right to call the police. Well, let's look at that too. Under Alabama law, it states that that repossession company has to take Stephen's truck without disturbing the peace. And without a court order to involve the police, I think that that tow truck company knew they didn't have a leg to stand on because attempting to repossess Stephen's truck was definitely going to disturb the peace. Whether it's on behalf of Stephen or the tow truck driver, there was definitely going to be disturbing of the peace during this repossession. Also, if those Decatur police officers went to Stephen's home to address a complaint, they should have gone to the front door. Since it's the middle of the night, you pull up to the home with your lights on, a couple officers go up to the front door and knock on the door and make their presence known. This is what you call de-escalation. But that is not what they did. Several officers involved in this case would later testify they went to Stephen's home to keep the peace and investigate, which would require visibility on the officer's behalf to do so, which we now know those officers were not visible. They hid, waiting for Stephen to come outside when the tow truck driver attempted to repossess his truck, which would classify this as those officers treating this like an active crime scene, which it absolutely was not. And because there was no active crime scene, a judge would later rule the officer that opened fire, Mac Marquette, acted outside his scope of authority and was in fact a trespasser on Stephen's property. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So as one can imagine, obviously right after Stephen lost his life, there was a huge uproar in the community. They wanted to see the body camera footage. However, the Decatur police refused to release that footage, stating Aaliyah, the Alabama law enforcement agency, had taken over the investigation into this case, and it was up to them when the body camera footage would be released. And this statement was just several days after the shooting. Now, about 2 weeks after the shooting, the police chief for the Decatur Police Department, Todd Pinion, would come out and apologize to the public for making a false statement about the shooting.
Decatur's police chief says his department erred in what it said happened the morning Stephen Perkins was shot and killed by an officer.
Chief Todd Pinion says in a statement released tonight that in their initial rush to release information to the public on the morning of September 29th, they gave inaccurate information about the interaction between Perkins and the officer. Police originally said the officer told Perkins to drop the weapon and that Perkins refused to do so. Now, Chief Pinion says that's not what happened.
Then this evening, Chief Pinion confirmed in his statement what we reported earlier, that the officer identified himself and told Perkins to get on the ground before the officer fired. The chief went on to apologize for the inaccurate description of the encounter in their first statement.
Now, the chief originally stated that Officer Marquette told Stephen Perkins to drop the weapon. But that's not, in fact, what Officer Marquette said that evening. What he actually said to Stephen was to get on the ground. Now, at the same time that the chief was apologizing for making this wrong statement, he stated he welcomed everybody in their First Amendment right to protest. Because following Stephen's shooting, there were protests. However, the things he said and what he actually did were two different things. Because multiple residents would end up being arrested at these rallies and protests by the Decatur police.
What started as a normal night of protest for the shooting death of Steve Perkins quickly turned chaotic in downtown Decatur. 3 people have been arrested during this afternoon's demonstrations. Even one of Steve Perkins' close family members was detained.
I arrived in downtown Decatur tonight just to check up on the protests, and when I did, I saw Steve Perkins' widow, Catrella Perkins, in handcuffs, surrounded by Decatur police officers. Now, she was later released from their custody, but 3 other protesters are facing charges tonight after tonight's arrest. Now, this is viewer video of Catrella Perkins being detained by Decatur police. I've been told by protesters Derek Taylor was also arrested tonight. He's the husband of Sierra Taylor, who was arrested and beaten by Decatur police last month for protesting outside of the home of Mayor Tab Bowling. Witnesses say officers approached Derek and requested he remove the mask he was wearing. Despite Derek complying and removing the mask, he was handcuffed and put in a patrol car. 2 other Perkins protesters, I'm told, are being booked right now as well.
We'll have a good evening. I'm going to arrest you first and foremost because you seem to be the main instigator.
There was not one officer that de-escalate anything, all right? See, that lets you know that they hadn't been properly trained. They definitely have not been properly trained. And those guys like Renshaw, they in this personal. They got personal vendettas. They're mad. They're angry, they're bitter, and they're taking out on the citizens.
And an independent review of the Decatur Police Department would later find these Decatur officers at these rallies and protests were there acting antagonistically towards these protesters, deliberately in an effort to try and place them under arrest.
19 people filed complaints against an officer following a demonstration last week. This is according to Morgan County NAACP President Rodney Gordon. The reported complaints follow what members of groups supporting Catrella Perkins, Steve Perkins' widow, say were met with, quote, harassment and unprofessionalism by Lieutenant Joe Renshaw during the 3rd Friday Street Festival.
Now, on October 17, 2023, just a couple weeks after the shooting, Stephen's family was supposed to be taken to seeing that body camera footage. But at the last minute, it was denied by Aaliyah, the agency who was investigating Stephen's shooting.
The Alabama law enforcement agency says it will not release body camera video related to the shooting death of Stephen Perkins. Aaliyah's denial follows a request for the videos from a Perkins family attorney. Aaliyah issued the denial letter today. Alabama law allows them to choose not to disclose the recording if that disclosure would affect an ongoing law enforcement investigation or prosecution.
And this was just their first of several denials that they would issue to Stephen's family, who was just trying to see the footage of what happened to their loved one. Now, on November 15th, about a month and a half after the shooting, Stephen's family would get his truck back from the tow truck company.
In an intriguing twist, Perkins' family has that repossessed truck back.
Steve Perkins' family says that Perkins was not behind on his payments. There was really no reason for that repo driver to even be at the house. They now feel vindicated now that they have this truck back in custody. And now even the lawyers are confused. They wonder why this truck wasn't considered for evidence for this ongoing investigation. Nick Perkins has mixed feelings about having a piece of his brother back with him.
I was happy, I was mad, sad, disappointed. I think every emotion that you could ever feel, I felt at that time, because it should not be me that has this truck. It should be my brother.
His attorneys and family members just want to know what happened that September 29th night.
They ambushed my brother and then took his truck, at least allowed his truck to leave. It was an active crime scene. I don't get it. So that's, of course, an answer that needs to be answered by this police department.
Now, that family still alleges that Stephen was not behind on his payments, meaning that Allstar Recovery should have never attempted to repossess the truck. And now, just 2 days after the family got that truck back, on November 17th, the chief of police, Todd Pinion, would come out and say the officers who responded to Stephen Perkins' home broke several department policies, but didn't elaborate on which policies they broke. And just a couple weeks later after that, on December 7th, the mayor of Decatur would come out and state 3 of those police officers from the Decatur Police Department were fired, and 1 of them was placed on suspension. Now, also in December of 2023, Stephen's family would file their federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Decatur, the 4 officers involved, the tow truck company, Allstar Recovery, the employees of the tow truck company, and Pentagon Federal Credit Union, who serviced the loan. Now, at the end of December, Aaliyah would announce that it had completed the investigation into this case and turned over their findings to the local district attorney. After receiving the findings from Aaliyah, that district attorney would then present the facts of the case to a grand jury of 18 people.
As a result of the facts and evidence presented in this case, the grand jury unanimously returned an indictment against Mac Bailey Marquette, charging him with the crime of murder.
After months of investigations into the shooting death of Steve Perkins, a former Decatur police officer is now charged with murder. Morgan County District Attorney Scott Anderson announced Friday morning that Mac Marquette had been arrested for shooting and killing Steve Perkins in his front yard. Law enforcement agencies have denied repeated requests to see body camera video from the night Perkins was killed. Now his family will get to see it, but Anderson says he's keeping it from the public to avoid tainting the jury pool.
Those 18 people unanimously voted to indict Officer Mac Marquette, and that next month, in January of 2024, Officer Mac Marquette would turn himself into jail after being charged with murder. Officer Marquette was then issued a $30,000 bond, which he made, and was ultimately released from jail. Now, this is more than several months after the shooting, and we're still at a point where Stephen's family hasn't seen any of the body camera footage, but then this happens. 6 months after the shooting, after multiple people were denied access to that footage, a conservative Alabama website, 1819, would release all of the body camera footage and the 911 calls from this incident, and this was unreleased footage. Now, the website would go on to state it is the footage that Aaliyah provided to the Morgan County District Attorney following the completion of their investigation, which Aaliyah states it never released to anybody but the district attorney. Now, a short time before 1819 released this official footage, there was a Ring doorbell camera that was recording from across the street where Stephen lived during the incident, and that footage was also released to the public.
The camera does not include a timestamp. The neighbor who provided the video told News 19 the entire encounter from the first police car driving down the street to the shooting was about 12 minutes. It appears that as the tow truck driver hitches Perkins' pickup truck, Perkins walks outside. You can see a light moving in the front yard. And within 7 seconds of Perkins walking outside, after more than 15 rounds were fired. Officers are seen running from different directions near Perkins' house. The end of the video shows a tow truck driver driving off with a pickup truck as officers stand near the fatally wounded Perkins.
But that was only released because the homeowner who owned that Ring doorbell camera released the footage. Now, fast forward to August in 2024, a judge would wind up dismissing most of Stephen's family's federal lawsuit, which included the claims against the officers and the city of Decatur. That judge dismissed the lawsuit without prejudice, meaning they could, and in fact did, refile the lawsuit. Now let's focus on Officer Mac Marquette for a minute. He was hired by the Decatur Police in fall of 2020, but apparently was uncertified. After being certified in April 2021 as a police officer, Officer Marquette began working the street for the Decatur Police. Here is a picture of Officer Marquette accepting an award from his police department just 1 week before that shooting. Apparently, Officer Marquette is an expert drone operator for the Decatur Police Department, and he got an award for it. Now, Officer Marquette would later file a motion and try to claim immunity from prosecution on the claim that his actions on the night of September 29th were self-defense.
In March, the judge rejected Marquette's claims that he acted in self-defense. His appeal of that ruling is now before the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals.
However, in March of 2025, Judge Elliott would deny that claim of immunity. And that judge had a couple things to say, which I mostly outlined towards the beginning of this video, but I will quickly summarize them. Number one, the night of the shooting, this was not an active crime scene, so it shouldn't have been treated like one. Those officers should have gone to Stephen's door instead of taking tactical positions, waiting for the tow truck driver to tow the vehicle and Stephen to come out upset. Now, that judge also states when Marquette emerged from his hidden position that he was still obstructed by Stephen's vehicle when he yelled out for him to get on the ground. When Mr. Perkins turned towards Officer Marquette, he did move his firearm away from the officer just before being shot. So the judge stated that Officer Marquette was not only acting outside the scope of his authority, but he was also a trespasser on Stephen Perkins' property. Because like we said at the beginning, without a court order, the repossession company cannot involve the police department in this repossession. It is against Alabama law. So then after Judge Elliott denied Officer Marquette's motion for immunity, the judge would then set a start date for Officer Marquette's criminal trial on June 9th of this year. So that brings us all the way up until last month, May of 2025, where then Officer Marquette files a motion to overturn Judge Elliott's ruling on the immunity hearing.
Just into our newsroom from Morgan County, Mac Marquette, the former Decatur police officer charged with murder in the death of Stephen Perkins, is appealing his request for immunity from the charges and asking the court to delay his trial, currently set for June the 9th. In March, the judge rejected Marquette's claims that he acted in self-defense. His appeal of that ruling is now before the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals.
And in this appeal to the state court, Officer Marquette is alleging that Judge Elliott abused his discretion by denying the immunity. Officer Marquette also states Aaliyah, the investigating body for this incident, found that Stephen Perkins was the aggressor in this incident and that Officer Marquette was justified in using deadly force. Lastly, this appeal also states, despite the fact that Judge Elliott said that Officer Marquette was a trespasser on Stephen Perkins' property, they state that doesn't change Officer Marquette's right to use deadly force. And this is Officer Marquette's appeal to state court on why they should overrule Judge Elliott's denial of Officer Marquette's immunity. Now, as I'm recording this, Officer Marquette's criminal trial is supposed to start today, June 9th, 2025. However, a request for postponement of the trial was granted, and a new trial date has been set for September 15th of this year. Now, one last thing before I go. In January of 2025, a private company, Green Research and Technology, was hired to come in and review the Decatur Police Department. And their report would later outline all sorts of problems within the department. But the main one I want to cover is, it was found that Decatur police officers would repeatedly facilitate disorderly conduct charges and obstruction of governmental operations on a regular basis. The report stated that questionable arrests from Decatur police officers for disorderly conduct and obstruction of governmental operations were often based on problematic lawful orders. So these officers were essentially going out and facilitating disorderly conduct and obstruction charges on people that should never have been arrested in the first place. At least that's what it sounds like to me. Now, several months after this report was released, the police chief for the Decatur Police Department, who also was the police chief at the time of the Stephen Perkins incident, would resign from the police department. Here is the police chief talking about that report.
I recognize there are areas and opportunities for improvement in this area, and I have already begun to implement some changes to ensure better accountability. In the days and weeks ahead, I will continue to look for areas of improvement and changes that can be made. I'm also concerned by the perception created by this report and by certain comments by members of our city administration that my administration has promoted more aggressive policing, a lack of accountability, and directing or allowing our officers to make unnecessary arrests. We acknowledge that we are not perfect, and there are situations where we could have made better decisions. I believe these are isolated incidents and not a reflection of the overall conduct of our officers or this department.
So that's where we're at in this case. We're waiting to hear back on Officer Marquette's appeal to grant him that immunity after Judge Elliott denied it. And again, if that doesn't go through, his criminal trial for Officer Marquette is set to start on September 15th of this year. But if anything else comes up in this case, make sure to check out the community post. I do a community post for every video I upload for any updates. Now, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. My name is Sai, and my channel is Dark Times with Nico and Sai. If you can, please like the video and leave a comment. I read and try to answer as many comments as I can because I want to hear from you. And also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps push my content out to a wider audience, and it doesn't cost you anything. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye. Goodbye.